Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Suarez, and I'm the co-director of the Urban Youth Trauma Center at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Thank you for participating in this course titled Understanding and Addressing Trauma and Violence Among Children and Adolescents. The Urban Youth Trauma Center is a SAMHSA-funded treatment services adaptation center. We are part of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network and funded to support youth impacted by trauma and community violence through awareness, training, and community engagement activities. We are funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority. The Urban Youth Trauma Center invites you to participate in the evaluation of this training program, which will help us learn more about the impact of the training. In the invitation for this training, you should have found instructions for how to sign into the training, complete the pre-evaluation surveys, and then the post-evaluation surveys and signing out of the training. Participating in the evaluation is completely voluntary. It will help us improve our programming and help us understand what the workforce is doing for violence prevention. As a thank you, when you complete the training, we will send you a $5 gift card for completing the evaluation, and there will be also an additional $5 gift card for each 6-month follow-up survey completed. The pre-evaluation survey includes a knowledge quiz, a registration form, and information about your use of best practices included in this training. And the post-evaluation survey will include the post-quiz, your community action plan, and a training feedback form. A few minutes after you have submitted the pre-evaluation survey, you will receive a link for the post-evaluation survey, which you should complete after viewing the full training video. This training will cover the following topics. First, we're going to discuss the effects of trauma and violence on youth. We will review strategies for supporting youth and families impacted by trauma and violence. We will be going over 5 best practices for violence prevention and trauma-informed intervention. And we will encourage you to develop your own individual action plan where you summarize what you can do within your role to apply the best practices discussed in this training program. Families experience many challenges that cause hurt and pain, and that they all need to heal from. We all experience everyday stress, which refers to the emotional and physical strain on a person's coping resources because of everyday problems. Reactions like, I'm having a bad day. This is really difficult to deal with. I am really worried about what's going to happen next. Families also experience intense stress and adversity. That includes challenges that come from divorce, losing a job, a chronic medical condition, eviction and homelessness, and the stressors of living in poverty and urban settings. Individuals can also experience persistent anxiety, which includes intense, excessive, and persistent worry and fear about everyday situations in a way that interferes with work, school, and relationships. Examples of persistent anxiety include feeling nervous, restless, or tense, having trouble concentrating, having trouble sleeping, difficulty controlling worry, and having the urge to avoid things that trigger anxiety. Finally, families can experience trauma and its effects. A traumatic event is an extremely frightening, life-threatening situation or overwhelming situation, and we refer to traumatic stress as the lasting effects of that traumatic event, such as, I keep having bad dreams that it is happening again, or I'm always afraid that I'm worried that I will die because I think it's happening again, or it's going to happen again. This training program is meant to help you support families impacted by trauma and violence. However, many of the tools we're going to discuss today apply to dealing with the impact of stress, adversity, and other sources of anxiety. The National Institute of Mental Health defines trauma as the experience of an event that is emotionally painful or distressful, which often results in lasting mental and physical effects. There are three parts to the trauma: the event, which can be one-time or chronic; the person's experience in which a situation was perceived as scary or threatening; and its effect, which is long-lasting and life-altering. Here's a list of different types of situations that can be considered to be traumatic. Most traumas involve other people, and that brings more layers to the ways in which people are affected by trauma. When we are harmed by others, especially those that were supposed to protect us, it becomes harder to trust other people. From then on, every social interaction is affected by our expectation of harm. Interpersonal traumas include community violence, domestic violence, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, neglect, sexual assault and rape, human trafficking, abduction, kidnapping, traumatic grief, traumatic separation, community unrest. It's important to point out that there are other types of traumas, including structural violence, which includes loss or disability that takes place because of the failure or inadequacy of the institutions that are supposed to be helping, as well as other forms of oppression. We can also experience natural disasters such as tornadoes, fires, and floods, as well as injuries or medical traumas, including car accidents, burns, dog attacks, gunshots, or going through a serious or scary illness or medical treatment. Not everybody is impacted by trauma in the same way. Something that is traumatic for one child or one person may not be traumatic to another. Effects are cumulative and they build on each other. The impact of trauma will depend on many things, including the objective nature of the event, what actually happened, also the subjective response, how you reacted to what happened, the person's age and developmental stage, how old you are, the maturity level and mental ability. That doesn't mean that young children are not able to experience trauma. They just experience it in a different way. Effects might be more generalized or not specific. They have this general sense of fear, but they might not have a specific memory attached to the situation. The perception of danger faced. How much did you feel your safety was threatened in that situation? It's possible that one child experiences the same situation, but because their caregiver or the person who they were with was very calm, they didn't think they were in danger at all, and so they might not be impacted by the same event as someone else who was in the company of somebody who was very much distressed and afraid. Whether the person was a victim or a witness, did it happen to you or did you see it happen? The person's relationship to the victim or the perpetrator, did it happen to or was it done by someone you know and care about, someone you trusted who was supposed to be helping you and protecting you? The person's past experience with trauma, thinking about how many times have you experienced negative events and how they change the way you see things and react. The adversities that the child faces following the trauma. How many other bad things are going on in your life since the event happened and also as a result of the event? And finally, the presence of adults who can offer help and protection. Who was there for you and your child to assist in dealing with the event and ensure your safety? Not everyone that experiences trauma has long-term problems. In fact, there are many people that strive to go on to do great things. Resilience refers to the positive capacity of people to cope with stress and life problems. Everyone has resiliency, the capacity to bounce back. There are a number of things that we can do to bring about this natural tendency to thrive, and these include helping to develop strong bonds and connectedness with parents and caring adults, providing opportunities for positive experiences in the community like school, church, and neighborhood, and supporting the development of personal qualities that are helpful, coping resources, courage, and leadership. The causes of trauma and violence are complex, and there's not usually a simple, unique explanation. Violence doesn't happen just because somebody one day decided to do something horrible to another person. There are many things that come together that lead to situations in which violence occurs. Because of this, solutions should consider why violence happens and what we can do. And the strategy should be based on those factors. At the individual level, youth who have been exposed to violence at an early age are more likely to perpetrate violence, display violent behaviors, or also more likely to be victims of violence. Again, kids who have and people who have a tendency towards impulsiveness. Also at risk is having poor school achievement, trouble with school, lack of support for academic problems that can put somebody at risk for violence exposure and violence perpetration. At the relationship level, being exposed to conflict in the home, arguments, aggression, lack of monitoring and supervision, when parents or caregivers who might have challenges of their own are unable to set consistent rules and expectations. Being exposed to peer delinquency, having friends who actively participate in illegal or unsafe activities, and also not having access to supportive adults. At the community level, having a lowered sense of social connectedness. When people don't feel like they fit in or belong in their community, there's a limited sense of responsibility that happens within the neighborhood that puts people at risk. When there's residential instability, not having a stable home or place to live in, and having gang activity in your neighborhood puts people at risk. At the societal level, we have norms about violence, the views of violence as an acceptable response based on what happens in the community and at home. Overexposure to violent TV shows, newscasts, video games, and social media. And also policies that influence job opportunities or violence prevention programs when jobs and resources are not easily accessible within a community. The Urban Youth Trauma Center has developed a training program for promoting best practices that addresses each of these complex factors. The training program is meant to help those in contact with youth to apply concrete strategies that can be helpful in preventing trauma exposure and reducing its effects based on 5 best practices which map on to the factors that contribute to violence included in the previous slide. The first best practice emphasizes knowing the signs and being supportive. We ask service providers to identify, help, and support survivors of trauma and community violence. We encourage youth to recognize when there's a problem and seek support. We also encourage caregivers to recognize changes in their children's mood and behavior and possible causes. A sense of trust emphasizes the importance of developing safe, stable, and nurturing relationships between children and their parents and other caring adults. A sense of mastery emphasizes the importance of developing life skills in children and adolescents. Feeling safe emphasizes promoting a safe environment in the community. And finally, changing the message emphasizes helping to change the rules and expectations in society that support violence. We will go over each one of these individually and ask you to think about one new thing you can do as a result of this training to apply these strategies. Because the causes of violence are complex, we need more than one solution. And we also need all members of the community and the service system representatives to play a role. Let's go into more detail into each of these practices and strategies. The first best practice is know the signs, be supportive, which emphasizes identifying, helping, and supporting survivors of trauma and violence. To illustrate each strategy, we will share with you a youth video, a short video. The Urban Youth Trauma Center partnered with Freeride Arts and Literacy to explain these principles from the perspective of youth. Each video features young people who were inspired by the best practices in order to create and perform a spoken word poem based on their personal stories. As you listen to Marshawn's video, think about the common challenges experienced by youth impacted by trauma and violence.
Can't eat and I can't sleep because the thoughts I got within. I had a friend just like a brother, and his life got put to end. A lot of trauma in my life, all I wanted was to win. You know I gotta make a change, you know a change don't come within. It get harder every day, but soon them days will come to pass. I got abused, I don't know why. It's so hard for me to ask. Mama, why you had to leave me with the snake in the grass? I'm traumatized, so now I'm cutting on my wrist with a glass. Every day this stuff get hard, I get the short end of the stick. I did a lot of stuff that I regret, the stuff I can't forget. I'm traumatized, not only me, but the people I was with. You say you walked up in my shoes, now the shoes wouldn't fit.
To better understand whether someone is struggling with trauma, let's talk about our survival responses. Have you ever heard about the fight, flight, or freeze response? Our bodies are prepared to respond physically to threat and danger. When we experience threat or danger, automatic biological reactions are set in motion. Adrenaline or cortisol are released to give the body a burst of energy and strength, and we can do superhuman things, things that we cannot do normally. In this survival state, we can actually hit harder, run faster. The fight, flight, or freeze response happens automatically. Our brain determines if we can take on the threat, if we need to run, or if we need to check out or play dead with the freeze response. Any of these responses is possible, and our brain decides in a split second which response is going to maximize our survival. If the brain determines we can take on the threat, we go into fight mode. If the brain decides we can't, then we may have to run away or freeze, wait it out, check out of our bodies, and hope to be alive when it's over. Think about situations that could lead to a survival response that involves threat and danger, such as being in a car accident or being threatened with violence and aggression by someone else. During the fight, flight, or freeze response, there are many things happening in the body that create these physical sensations that you might feel in these situations. The hormones, adrenaline, and cortisol are being released, speeding up the heart rate so that we can do more things and adding blood, sending more blood to the major muscle groups, and changing our other autonomic nervous functions so that we have a burst of energy and strength. All of these adaptive processes cause these physical sensations. The heart starts pumping more blood so that our muscles get more oxygen and we can be stronger or run faster, so we can hear our heart pounding, we can feel our heart pounding, palpitations, and a fast pulse. The blood rushes away from non-essential organs and functions so that our muscles are able to do more intensive work. At the time of threat, our body is not concerned, for example, with digesting food or other non-essential functions. When the body rushes away from the stomach, we may feel nausea or a knot in the stomach. And that's helpful for survival so that we're more likely to make it in the situation of threat. But when these things happen over and over, it can cause some strain. In times of threat, our attention is focused on the attacker or the threat. We have tunnel vision, so we can hone in on what's threatening to us. This can be experienced as blurry vision when we're in a situation and these feelings come rushing into us. We might feel like we can't see very well. We might also experience sweating or a clammy feeling, which might serve to cool us down or make our bodies more slippery if caught. That might be the adaptive function of these sensations. And then we might also feel cold hands or feel frozen or immobile, which could make us more likely to survive an attack. If we, for example, are attacked by a wild animal and we're frozen, they might not be able to see us or not be interested because we are not moving. All of these sensations and responses are normal and adaptive and are associated with self-preservation. Sometimes these sensations get activated in situations where neither response is appropriate. When we are in regular day-to-day situations, but we're reminded of something that might happen, and we have the survival response. When the perceived threat is gone, systems are designed to return to normal, and eventually the systems relax. But in times of chronic stress and trauma, this often doesn't happen enough. People are constantly on survival mode, and the systems are constantly activated, which eventually can damage the body and result in long-lasting health problems and also exaggerated responses to stress and perceived threat. Think back to a time when you might have experienced a fight, flight, or freeze mode. Maybe you were crossing an intersection, or maybe you were about to get into an argument. During these perceived threatening situations, our body is reacting in survival mode. We don't have the opportunity to think things through. When our brain has to make an immediate decision to keep us safe, there's no time to rationally evaluate the options. Should I run this way? Should I hit them in the face or the stomach? We just need to act. The emotional part of the brain takes over, and the connection between the rational part of the brain is broken down temporarily so that we can make quick decisions. In these times of survival, we don't have access to the part of the brain that controls our ability to speak. When we think we are under threat, this is not the time to talk about our feelings or to evaluate options or to try to apologize for our behavior. So we have to be mindful when we're working with kids and families who might be having the survival response, or with our kids and family members and people in the community who might be having this survival response. They might not be immediately speaking rationally. The brain is working hard to figure out an immediate response to potentially keep us alive. The body is concerned with immediate solutions for safety. Once the perceived threat is gone, it takes the body a little bit of time to recuperate, and a rational part of the brain takes over again. Many times, people impacted by trauma go into these survival states even when there's no threat of danger anymore. When this happens, it's hard for them to think rationally and to focus on schoolwork or other activities. Some examples of how trauma can affect youth in the long term include trouble in relationships. Most times, trauma is caused by someone close to us. When your trust has been broken by somebody you love, it is very hard to believe that other people have good intentions or won't hurt you in a similar way to the people who caused you harm. Sometimes people believe that being let down in relationships is normal because that's what they've grown up with or witnessed. Even when your trauma hasn't been caused by someone you know or care about, it can lead you to expect harm or disappointment from others. Another effect is problems controlling emotions and behavior. When a person has experienced trauma and has not had the opportunity to deal with their emotions related to their experience, it is much easier for them to be set off. Sometimes even the smallest things have the ability to trigger larger emotions and make youth more likely to fight or be easy to bring to tears. Many times their actions may not be directly related to the situations that have caused their emotional responses, but are more directly related to traumatic events that happened to them in the past. So they might not even be reacting to what's happening right now, but it reminds them of what happened. Another way people are impacted is the way they think about themselves and the future. Sometimes the effect of trauma, when gone untreated, can cause youth to feel that they are to blame for what has happened to them, and that those feelings are mixed with hopelessness that can be brought on by people in roles of authority, teachers or caregivers, and that can lead the youth to not believing that a successful future is within reach. People can also have problems with learning, memory, attention, and concentration. When youth have gone through a traumatic situation or are currently living in trauma, it becomes very difficult for them to think about anything outside of what they are going through, internally or at home. If a youth lives in a chaotic household where their safety is in question, things such as studying and homework may not be a priority. Early exposure to violence can affect brain development and get in the way of learning. Behavioral issues. Sometimes unaddressed traumas can cause youth to feel pain that they cannot understand, or they feel that they cannot control. Some youth might turn to negative behaviors to cope with the trauma, such as self-harm, to try not to feel the pain, and some youth may turn to drugs to numb themselves from the pain of their past experience. In addition, some youth will engage in unsafe sexual activity or unsafe thrill-seeking, running away, driving under the influence. And finally, long-term health problems. Oftentimes, when traumatic experiences go untreated, people may suffer with alcohol and substance use, suicidal thoughts and behaviors, and depression and health issues, including obesity, diabetes, STDs, heart stroke, COPD, broken bones, and even early death. People are at a greater risk of injury and other challenges, and the likelihood of a shorter lifespan is greater with trauma and adversity. For this reason, it is important to identify these challenges and connect people with needed supports. As a result of trauma exposure, people can develop post-traumatic stress disorder, which includes intrusion symptoms such as involuntary memories, dreams, flashbacks about the traumatic event, and strong body reactions such as increased heart rate when reminded of the trauma. They can also experience avoidance of anything that reminds them of the trauma. They can also experience increased arousal, irritability, anger, hypervigilance, exaggerated startled response, problems with concentration, sleep disturbance, and they can also experience changes in mood and thought, memory problems, persistent negative beliefs about themselves and the world, and distortions about cause. Everything is my fault, or everyone is out to get me. Nobody's going to help me. Let's talk about possible triggers or trauma reminders. Triggers and trauma reminders occur when we see, hear, or feel something that reminds us of dangerous or frightening things that happened in the past. When we experience these reminders, our body might respond like it did when the trauma first happened, even when there's not actual threat present. Reactions to trauma reminders could include false alarms, when the body may respond like it did when the trauma first happened, or overactive alarms, where a person might react intensely to something that typically would not cause stress. to other people. Think about situations that may be triggering to people based on the types of traumas that they have experienced. A number of things can trigger traumatic stress reactions. Some of the most common include seeing a person related to the traumatic event or someone that has a similar physical trait to the people involved in the trauma. Thoughts and emotions. Having a similar feeling to the way someone felt during a traumatic event, like being afraid, helpless, or stressed, could cause them to worry that the bad thing might happen again. Some sensations, such as pain, are triggers for survival of trauma. Those who have survived an assault, a certain touch on body parts may lead to a flashback or somebody getting too close in their personal space. Seeing an object that reminds them of the trauma can be a trigger. Scents and smells. Smells are strongly tied to the memories. Someone who survived a fire might become very upset from smoke coming off a barbecue. Someone who was sexually abused might have a strong reaction to a perfume or odor that reminds them of the perpetrator. Places. Returning to the scene of the trauma or a similar type of place could bring traumatic reactions. TV shows, news reports, and movies. Seeing a similar trauma, including scenes from a television show or movie or a news report. Sounds. Hearing specific noises, songs, or voices may bring back memories of the trauma. For example, hearing a car backfire may remind someone of gunshots in the neighborhood, or hearing loud noises like an unruly classroom might remind a child of violence in the home. Sometimes even silence could be a trigger depending on the person's experience. Like the calm before the storm, kids might associate extreme silence with people walking on eggshells trying to prevent an abusive caregiver from losing their temper. Tastes. The taste of something which was associated with a traumatic event could be a trigger. People may associate different situations with their traumatic experiences. For example, being stuck in an elevator might remind you of feeling trapped after a car accident. Anniversaries. It's often hard to go through a date marked by trauma without remembering it, as is the case for many survivors of terror attacks or community violence. The date when something tragic happened is a tough anniversary to go through. Birthdays of loved ones who were lost to violence, and also holidays can be difficult. And finally, reading or hearing certain words could cue a traumatic stress reaction. So it's important to think about in school, there might be part of something that's regularly part of the classwork that inadvertently might set off a child because their trauma happens to be related to whatever coursework they're going through. How can we be helpful to someone that is experiencing a reaction to a trauma reminder? One of the first things that we can do in advance of encountering the situation is that we should think about whether there's a possibility that my own interactions with this child or other family members could unintentionally set them off because of their past experiences with trauma. While I might be just trying to help or doing my own thing, somehow the person might get set off. Maybe I was being too noisy. Maybe I came too close and I made them uncomfortable. Regardless of the reason, if we know that our behavior could be setting someone off, let's consider doing something different or at least backing up from that behavior for a while until the person is able to manage the situation. Many times it's impossible to predict that somebody will react this way. We just need to be mindful and be quick to respond when we see a change. How can I tell if someone is showing a triggered response? The main thing to look for is a change from their previous behavior. We may want to consider asking the person if they're okay, if something happened that was upsetting, or if they're reminded about something that was upsetting. Traumatic reactions can range from something being super quiet or still, intimidated or afraid, to somebody being very agitated and aggressive. But the reaction is different starting from the point where they were triggered. How can my responses reduce anxiety for children and family members when they're reacting to trauma reminders? If possible, try to provide some assurance to the person's safety and well-being. If they're being triggered, they might have been transported to remember a moment of threat, uncertainty, or pain. You can help anchor them on the situation that they're currently in. If someone is showing a survival response, they're not going to be able to act rationally and speak coherently right away. People need some time to calm down before they can gain control of their actions again. If possible, try to give them some space to get themselves back together. After they're calm, then it's a good time to talk about what happened, understand more of what they were going through, and figure out some options. It's best to have these conversations one-on-one rather than in front of a group of people. Being trauma-informed means that you realize the widespread impact of trauma and understand that there are many different potential paths to recovery. Recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in friends and family and community members. Respond to situations, conversations, interactions, and struggles in a way that is consistent with the knowledge you have about the trauma, and advocate to make sure others take this information into consideration as well. And avoid re-traumatization. To put it simply, being trauma-informed means that you change the way you ask the question, going from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. Applications of this first best practice involve having a trauma-informed workforce that knows how to recognize when someone is affected by trauma, adapts and implements trauma-informed procedures, and is informed about community resources so that youth in need can be connected with needed resources. It is important for you to be good to yourself and use self-care strategies. We have to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others. Be aware of situations that may be triggering to you, such as youth being challenging of authority, people being aggressive. Anticipate possible interactions that might be triggering to the youth and families that you're working with. The second best practice is a sense of trust, which emphasizes developing safe, stable, and nurturing relationships between youth, caregivers, and caring adults. Let's listen to Angel illustrating the importance of establishing a connection.
People doubted she could teach us poetry, calling us underdogs at best. The misogynist believed in us, knew we could surpass any test. We ignored her at first, drifting off in class, but there was no evading her. Short shot of black espresso. She woke us up, had us writing by the mass. Concisely like she said, straight to the point like a haiku. She ain't waste no time with syllables on nonsense, gently cared in the process. Always listening to what we shared as if it were already a poem recited in the air. We learned to tell our truth this way, unafraid to be ourselves, even learn new words like resilience, metaphor, and simile. One day she told me, it's not the dog in the fight, but the fight in the dog. Trust me, she would have spit the truth in this minute, and in it, you might have found yourself.
Trauma exposure may affect children's ability to trust others. When trauma is associated with the failure of those who should be protecting and nurturing the child, it has profound and far-reaching effects on every aspect of a child's life. Traumatized children can feel that the world is uncertain and unpredictable. They can become socially isolated and have difficulty relating to and empathizing with others. For this reason, it is important to support safe, stable, and nurturing relationships between children, caregivers, and caring adults. How can we help and youth, and how can we be that person that youth and families can depend on and trust? How can we help youth develop relationships with others that are based on trust? It helps to think about what are the characteristics of a trustworthy person, and what are the characteristics of a trusting relationship. We need to ensure that we help youth connect with others who have these qualities, and we need to work on demonstrating these qualities when we try to connect with youth. A trustworthy person is authentic, someone who is real. Authentic people are likable, humble, and easy to talk to. A trustworthy person is consistent. Steady, positive behavior, good decision-making is key when finding someone to trust. Trustworthy people display a consistent interest and involvement in your life. Integrity, a person who's willing to stand up for what's right no matter who's watching. Compassionate, a person who has the ability to think about and feel for others. Resourceful, a person who's always learning and growing. They realize this, that there's always room to get better. Because of that, they know how to support others. Resourceful people are willing to share their own lessons learned, give good advice, and have the ability to connect people to resources. Think about ways that you can build on your relationships with youth and community members so that they can rely on you as someone you trust. This is incredibly important because we want to help youth develop relationships with other peers, adults, and their family members in a way that establishes trust. How might crime and violence in the community affect school climate? The sense of trust can be diminished with crime and violence by giving students and school staff a lowered sense of safety. Student-teacher interactions are also impacted when there's crime and violence. Students might be acting tough for self-preservation, and in return, they might be labeled by school staff as problem students and categorized as kids who are not interested in learning, which feeds into negative interactions and a lack of opportunity for connections. This might lead students to feel that teachers or other school staff don't have their best interests at heart. And this is just something that's caused by that tension in the climate. It's not something that people do on purpose. Another way in which crime and violence impact school climate has to do with authority and consequences. When there's violence in the schools, there tends to be a strong reliance on professional security guards or police to administer punishments, which oftentimes far away the student offenses. It may be hard for police to enforce a consequence, for example, that has to do with a dress code. After a few times of being released from police custody, students may get the sense that they can get away with anything, and this can inadvertently lead to escalation of problem behavior. Additionally, by overly relying on outside authority figures, teachers and school staff might undermine their own legitimacy as authority figures and weaken the trust. The involvement of law enforcement in this way can also contribute to the school-to-prison pipeline, which impacts ethnic minority students in particular. This is not to say that law enforcement shouldn't be involved. It's just that let's think about what are ways to make sure that we work together to build that environment of trust. So what are the benefits of creating a welcoming and supportive environment? There's an increased sense of safety, a reduction in violence and conflict, and improved potential for learning. So how do we apply this best practice of developing a sense of trust? It is important to strengthen caregiver-youth relationships, working with youth, parents, and caregivers to improve the relationship between them and other caring adults. We want to connect caregivers to needed services and supports and resources so that they can be that person that the kid needs to count on. And we want to connect caregivers to parenting classes and support groups as well. It's important to connect youth to caring adults. You can become a mentor to be that trusted adult, or you can help connect kids with mentors and other supportive adults, developing relationships with people in the community, being a resource to concerned community members. And finally, we want to strengthen the workforce and the community, sharing information about how trauma can affect relationships, implementing programs that provide opportunities for youth to connect with caregivers as well as other caring adults in the community. The third best practice is a sense of mastery, which emphasizes developing life skills in children and adolescents. In this video, let's listen to Grace tell us about how developing life skills was extremely helpful to her when she was struggling.
When the war cry of depression first threatened my unsuspecting heart, when the foot soldiers of anxiety first set up camp in my mind, my hands became the mouthpiece of voices that sought to ruin me. You are worthless, I copied on the page 100 times, dutifully, like a child sentenced to the chalkboard. You are ugly, I heard them say, but I had yet to tally the advantages of my troops, my weapons, my terrain. I'd been training for this battle since the day when I was born. Songs sung above my crib, lessons learned in grammar, taught me to speak my voice, to hear its call in script. Notes on comprehension, hours of tedious spelling, led me to understand the story my life is telling. You don't know anything about anything, I found myself writing. But at this, my skilled combatants restrained themselves no more. On the front line, lullabies and songs, fairies and goblins, rhymes and legends, an arsenal of adjectives, sonnets by the score. These, the friends of my youth, struck down the lying voices of the enemy, declared my own voice the strength in the law of the land. My bold teachers, my wise warriors, proved the world is mine.
Mastery can be defined as the feeling of being able to influence and change things around you to reach an important goal. Mastery gives people a sense of control over their environment. It gives us hope that we can be successful. There are many opportunities for kids to develop life skills. This includes participation in sports, arts, music, leadership, academic enrichment, vocational assistance programs, as well as the development of the skills to cope with stress. Coping skills can include deep breathing, drawing, writing poems. Youth can learn how to identify feelings and communicate with others without arguing and being aggressive. As an example, let's think about how can sports lead to the development of mastery. For example, participating in basketball can help youth learn about teamwork, working together for the good of the team, perseverance, the idea never to give up, sportsmanship, learning how to accept defeat, practicing, developing skills and strategies to reach your goals, and adapting, readjusting and keeping on trying, adapting your game plan, and keeping pushing forward. Many times, these activities, these life skills, these community events become a lifeline for youth, especially those who have very little hope or a very difficult situation in their lives as a result of trauma and adversity. Many of these situations and opportunities and experiences like a sports participation may become more important to them than classwork or family life. Sadly, whenever a kid misbehaves or messes up, what is the first thing that adults usually think about as a consequence? They might decide to kick him off the team, or parents might decide, I'm not taking you to that favorite class of yours because you were disrespectful to me. A kid who has almost lost hope or connections to others, when these lifelines are taken away, they might all of a sudden become someone who has nothing else to lose. And that is even more difficult. Think about it. When a kid has asthma and they misbehave, we don't take away their inhaler as punishment. They need it to breathe. In the same way, these opportunities for mastery are also very important for youth. So when a kid misbehaves, it's important to give a consequence, but perhaps we can adjust the consequence to fit the nature of the offense. If a kid was disrespectful at school, maybe they can sit out the game but still come and support the team. If the problem was at home, perhaps they can miss a different activity or engage in additional chores or lose other privileges. Ultimately, we want to support caregivers, teachers, and all community members in an unending task of supporting kids' development and being mindful about how we do it. To apply this best practice, we encourage all of you who come in contact with youth to work towards offering or connecting youth to programs that support the development of life skills, sports, arts, music, leadership, academic enrichment, vocational assistance, and everything that happens in the classroom. Sharing information or talking about the importance of developing life skills among youth, and becoming informed about these available resources for life skill development in the community. The next best practice is feeling safe, which emphasizes the importance of promoting a safe environment in the community. In this video, let's listen to Mariela share her story titled A Room with Three Walls and Some Curtains. Here, she describes the experience of what helped her create a sense of safety with her family within a very stressful juvenile justice context that was residential.
I'm in a place where I can hear everything and see people I don't feel safe with. This person has problems controlling herself. Every time I see her, she's violent and arguing with people. My room is the place I stay with my son when my husband is at work. My room is all I have. The bed isn't mine, but it feels soft and comfy to sleep with my son and husband. My son makes me feel safe, just like I know he feels safe when I hold him on my arm, knowing that I can provide in every way. When he sleeps, I hear all the noises. I take out my pencil and paper and draw anything that comes in my mind. That's when my mind gets lost in the lines. The bright colors, the dark colors, or just in the pencil. When my husband comes home with dirt on his face, looking tired and stressed, but still gives me a soft kiss and asks me, how was your day? How was the baby? I know that he will do anything for us to be safe. Being around people whom you don't feel safe can be hard, so finding your safe space can be right there in the same place.
Trauma exposure affects people's sense of personal safety. Living, working, and going through school in urban areas can at times feel like being in a war zone. Many times, kids and families also lack access to safe areas for recreation. Traumatic experiences can have larger effects depending on how dangerous the situation was from the point of view of the victim, the amount of struggle and hard times faced during the period, and whether there were adults and other supports that could offer help and protection. For these reasons, it's important to reestablish a sense of safety. There are three types of safety that we want to talk about. First, or physical safety, the situation or place where you don't feel at risk of harm or in danger, and helping kids get to those places. There's also psychological and emotional safety, being surrounded by people we trust and that help us feel comfortable, and being in situations, setting up an environment where we can feel safe. Third, we can think about the safekeeping of our future, thinking about situations or decisions that an individual makes to put their achievement of their goals or their future at risk, something we need to help kids think about. Dealing with threat and safety involves 3 levels. First, surviving, managing the threat and danger when trauma and violence are still happening, making sure that family members are safe and free from harm. If the trauma or violence is still happening, the first priority is to do what it takes to keep the child and family members away from harm. Sometimes it's not possible to be completely sure that we are free from harm, but it is important to put safety plans in place to minimize the threat as much as possible. Next, we want to restore stability, making sure that immediate needs are met once the threat is over. Many times in situations involving traumatic events, family members are separated from each other, from their homes, or their belongings. In the midst of trauma, this instability creates additional uncertainty and stress. It is important to try to restore a sense of routine and balance despite all the changes so that people can feel more regulated and at ease. So even if all family members are not yet together, or if they're in different settings, they can manage to keep some similar routine, like a bedtime routine, family meals, walks or movie nights, something to bring back a sense of psychological safety and emotional security. Finally, people impacted by trauma will need support in making ongoing decisions that prioritize safety in current situations and relationships. Someone who has experienced harm from others is going to have a hard time seeing the red flags early and end up in situations where they might be harmed again. So we want to provide support for kids and families in this situation. A lowered sense of safety can lead to emotional and cognitive stress. It can lead to reductions in working memory and cognitive distractions, and poor school performance. And it can also have an impact through disruptions in the classrooms. Students may be distracted by ongoing conflict between students and enduring disorderly classrooms. Classroom management techniques that may be effective to manage disruption during these stressful situations are usually less conducive to creativity and learning. So it's a balance to create settings that are safe but are also conducive to feeling comfortable and encouraging creativity and learning. When we strive to create safe and supporting learning environments, we have increased trust, which can help everyone concentrate on learning, and therefore school performance improves. To apply this best practice of feeling safe, we encourage all of you who come in contact with youth and families to work towards participating in efforts to assist youth and families find places where they feel safe, and if possible, brainstorm strategies for helping them stay out of harm's way, working to create and enhance access to safe spaces for youth and families, applying trauma-informed strategies to prevent the escalation of violence, and if possible, supporting peace rallies or safe passage programs in your community. The final best practice is changing the message, which emphasizes the need to change rules and expectations in society or cultural norms that support violence. In this video, Lukman's spoken word poem titled Lessons in the Cycle, gives us a glimpse of how youth can break the cycle of retaliation and violence. As we listen to the video, think about the different ways in which violence becomes a regular part of life for youth impacted by violence and adversity. And also think about what are some things that can make a change.
He gained 30 pounds when he died. Just wants to fit in. No role models. No one who will listen. It's hard to see the lessons in the cycle of retaliation. Got to high school, next step that gangbanging. A boy died right before our eyes. Well, yeah, I cried, but still I rise. A change of scenery might have encouraged me to make it out. Just wants to fit in. Cost him his life. Should have took a break that day. Steered away from the fight. Ignored my fears to show out for peers. Trapped in a cell. Made my body strong and my spirit as well. From fist fights to gunshots. 5 went off and little bro caught one. Bullet frying his flesh from a 25 caliber gun. God bless the fallen. He would have been in college. I changed my fate, my route. A couple mentors helped to pull me out. It took a village, yeah, no doubt. Now I'm a leader from up north to down south.
How does violence become a regular part of life for youth impacted by community violence and adversity? The rules and expectations of behavior in society can sometimes encourage violence. Early exposure to verbal and physical aggression can influence youth to accept violence or become aggressive. Having the wrong impression about other people's intentions can lead to violence. For example, an accidental bump can be interpreted as being intentional. Violence in the media and on the internet can make people more accepting of violence in the community. For these reasons, it's important that we change the message. Social norms refer to society's rules and expectations for behavior which often go unspoken and are learned through everyday exposure and social interactions. Social norms that encourage violence refers to the fact that oftentimes we act based on rules and expectations around us in which violence is normalized, encouraged, and even glorified. Witnessing aggression between friends, family, and the media, and the community at large influences all of us. When people are surrounded by experiences that include violence, they begin to expect the worst from others, and this can make it more likely that other people's behaviors are interpreted negatively, which can lead to more aggression. Our responses can serve as a positive influence to prevent violent outcomes. A few words can change perceptions with social expectations and norms. By refusing to be a passive, silent bystander, we can also break the cycle. When dealing with challenges at home and in the community and in the school, we should strive to emphasize peaceful solutions that are inclusive, that they emphasize strength, that they embrace diversity, and they promote mutual respect. To apply this best practice, we encourage all of you coming in contact with youth to work within your role to stress the importance of mutual respect and encourage the use of conflict resolution skills that do not lead to aggression or violence, to address attitudes towards community violence, aggressive and violent behaviors, weapons, and gangs, to provide and connect youth to programs in which adults or youth serve as positive role models, to show mutual respect and using good problem-solving skills. And in your professional and personal relationships, we encourage you to develop ties with community members to promote a sense of trust and cohesion, foster a sense of community and cooperation among neighbors, and to model and teach nonviolent, non-aggressive de-escalation and redirecting strategies. As I mentioned earlier, Because the causes of violence are complex, we need multiple solutions, and we need to work together. Every one of you plays an important role. To summarize all we have covered today, here are some ideas for what each of you can do to apply the 5 best practices for trauma-informed violence prevention. Teachers, notice changes in the classroom. Work to build a classroom climate that fosters trust. Motivate youth by connecting classroom skills to life goals. Promote environments that help youth feel emotionally safe. Practice conflict resolution in school situations. Law enforcement, when responding to violence in the community, help to identify kids impacted by violence and involve other systems for help. Develop relationships with people in the community and with the kids in the schools. Model assertive responses. Apply trauma-informed strategies for de-escalation of violence. And model mutual respect. Mental health providers, use trauma-informed screening and treatment tools. Make it a regular practice to screen for trauma exposure. Address communication and conflict in relationships when you're working with youth and families. Help kids and parents develop coping skills to manage stress. Teach about interpersonal safety. And promote peaceful solutions. Help them see an alternative point of view. To wrap up the training, I want to encourage you to think about one thing you can do differently based on what you learned today. Which of the 5 best practices can you apply? Does your plan involve providing programs or direct services, developing or improving programs that are already out there, connecting kids with services or resources, doing advocacy and policy, providing information to people who need it, holding discussions with the community, being an example for others, doing self-care, or collaborating and networking with others so that we can make a big difference. What makes your plan trauma-informed? What can get in the way of following through with the plan? And how can you overcome these challenges? Is there any support that you might need? And let us know about it because we want to help. Please consider helping us with the evaluation of this program. This training invitation included a link to the pre-evaluation, and once you've submitted that, you should have received an email with an invitation to complete the post-evaluation.